Hello friends, and welcome to another video. So in this video I'm going to answer the question, are tube types important or is it something else? And yes, so because as you could have seen, I've previously always had an amp in a similar test setup as this, and then I started experimenting with a Type 47 in differential mode and using a classic power supply setup. And immediately I had a huge step up in quality from my old amp that you have seen in most of my videos. When I was building the Lancelot and doing other videos, I've been using the same type of amp, and you can see that in 2P, it's the 2P29L, so it's that tube. Here it's unpacked and removed, metal shell removed, and it was driving 4P1Ls. I used a tube regulated power supply, and then I went to a classic supply. So I had a huge jump up, but was it the fact because I changed the power supplies, or was it the tube? Now looking back, because after this, of course, a single stage differential mode, I got to optimize the power supply setup. And now first things first, I think the topology of the amp makes a huge difference. So later on I switched to single-ended, and I think single-ended has its own optimized power structure compared to a push-pull or a differential type amp. I found that different rectifiers work better with that. I could, with push-pull, I could go more to a high impedance type of input circuitry, like power circuitry, whereas with a single-ended I feel that a low impedance power supply works much better. So those are generalities. So we can already establish from what I'm saying here, or we could draw that conclusion, is that the power supply has a massive influence in the way you set it up and you optimize it. So it is giving the tube its ideal working environment. That makes quite a large difference, and I think now looking back, if I looked at the difference from going from differential here to single-ended, yes, the typology of the amp has a huge difference, so that is one. The power supply setup also has a huge difference. So and it's so characteristic, I would say that the typology exceeds the tube type completely, because it has its very own specific nature. Yes, you will see the tube in it, but it's so specific, I would say, that differential differs from push-pull, difference from single-ended, and things like signal length and so on, whether it's a 1, a 2 or a 3 stage amp, those things impact quite a bit as well. That is not to say that the tube amp the tube type doesn't matter, but looking back, the power supply setup did the largest jump. Then the typology would be second, and then the tube types would be third in overall priority types. But we have to address something else, the fourth factor in this, and that is driver or power tube. And now I would agree with Suzuma Sakuma, was an unusual designer. Look him up if you haven't, and his designs. He always argued that the driver was more important than the output tube, and the reason was these are so good. They have the lowest distortion of directly heated trios have the lowest distortion of any amplification device known to man. And so why would you take something as a driver that is less than the output stage, even though what really happens, you have to realize that the driver stage, what that produces, if there's any flaw, the output stage is going to amplify it a couple of times. So technically this one should be more perfect than that, yet we pay all our attention into the output tubes. And so Sakuma of course said, no, I'm going to have a 300B drive, for example 2 300Bs in push-pull configuration. And he said that can really sing, and that's also said that he learned the real sound of the 300B. And you know why he said it? It's because when you double up on the same tube type, so you have a 300B driving a 300B or 2, what you get is the deficiencies of this sound, or the the personality of these sounds gets magnified because you're using the same type of tube again, and so you get a doubling up. And so any flaw, any typical sound gets just exemplified. So I would generally stay away from that concept. I haven't liked it so far. But if you want to know the type of tube and you want to really know its characteristics, put two of them in the same amp, and you'll really find out what the characteristic of that tube is. So that is the point 4. The driver is of crucial importance, and there, because it gets amplified, you want to have a really good tube and also one that can drive the output tube. So that is number 5, probably a factor in this. You need to have something that can drive the tube hard enough, because that has a very specific influence. If the driver is strong enough, it will grip, it will just put a vice on the output tube, and it really will just push it to do it exactly what it needs to do. And that's of course what Suzuma Sakuma also did. He always used very powerful output tubes to drive the output tube. There's a very characteristic sound that comes from that, a certain authority in the sound. So that works. Now, point 7. Optimal loading. So the output transformer is extremely important, and the loading of a tube. Now that is very specific to the tube. Is that more important than tube type? That's a bit weird question to ask, but every tube has its own optimal working point. And I'll get through, I still really haven't answered your question whether the tube type is important and where it comes into play, because I'm going to disclose that well, because it really does. But it's subtle, it is in your taste. So the loading is important and it belongs to the tube. Generally what I find, if a tube isn't driven well enough, or the load is too light, so you have you don't step it down enough, so it's not loaded properly, what I find is that the sound becomes a bit feeble, incomplete, fragile, without heft. It's not filled in, the sound. It doesn't feel rich and complete. And when it's loaded properly, the sound really shines. Another thing that helps a lot, point number 8 probably, is the voltage that you put on it, the working point. Usually with higher voltages and so on, you get a bit more hi-fi thing, but the different some tubes I find are very critical to their working point. Others surprisingly work well even if you do use them with far less current flowing through them. For example, the 4P1L that I had, you really want 35 milliamps, 200 volts. It's low distorting then, it sounds full. You get the bass is starting to come out, which is all about the loading point. These were surprisingly gentle. Janus from Real World Audio said these are the 1624 or the 807. Once you crank up the voltage, they come into a new league. They just jump up in quality. So I haven't tried that to put 600 volt on it. I only had 320. But they're surprisingly good, because I tried them first at like 200 volts or something, to 230 volt, and they still sounded really good, which was surprising because a lot of tubes are much more critical to that. But it can step up a whole league apparently, and I trust him in his judgment. And again, we're talking about giving the right environment for the tube to shine. Now, one general rule that I found that where the tube type or tube construction actually comes into play is that these old tubes with super large plates and large distances between the filament and the plate, here as well, here you have got the 26, the type 26, you can see it again, large construction, huge distances, much more than the smaller tubes that you later see, like a 6CG7 or so, those miniature tubes. They sound hopeless compared to these. Not only because it's directly heated, but just of the old-fashioned construction and large plate distances. They always affect the sound. I find it always affects the sound positively. So I would say size matters, and this 2P29L is probably the exception. This is an exceptionally good driver tube. Low plate resistance, quite powerful for a driver tube, surprising sound. I would put this at 90% of the Type 26 probably. Very good tube, relatively, and cheap and affordable. So, the tube type, does it matter? Yes, it completely matters, and you know where it comes in. The combination of driver and power tube, and then your personal taste. There is just something about tone and getting the tone right, that there are magic combinations of driver tubes with an output tube that just work. I find this combination very pleasurable. I haven't optimized it just yet, but I can already tell this is a very... I probably need to do something about the dynamics. It's not that strong a driver, the 26, but boy, this is nice. The tone is just so beautiful. And that's really where I think the tube types comes in, and it's the tone and personality of your amp, and whether you want that to be more crisp, whether you want it to be more hi-fi, or that you want it to be more romantic. That is really, I think, where the tube types come in, and then you can also support the rest of your circuitry to optimize for that. So I would sort of maybe saying, you know what, maybe you have different, you could hire a lot of different carpenters for this, and they all do the job the same thing. However, each has their own style, and so what they build will have a certain style, and the tube has a certain style and personality, and a certain high-low balance, and a certain tone, and I think that is like seasoning a meal, and by using the right tube types, it really you can give it the character and the certain artistry, like choosing a type of violin, a certain maker of violin, or a double bass, or a guitar. They're all the same thing. They produce the same notes, and they'll use it much. But the personality, the real flavor, the thing that goes with you, that goes with the player, that is where the tube types come in. That's at least how I see it now, and this is well away from any technical characteristics or distortion figures, because if you look at the distortion leaks, for example, the 4P1L has an extremely low THD, much probably better than the 300B, but that doesn't matter. I'll have this in my amp any day over the 4P1L. So it's not that distortion figure. That is where the personality of the tube comes in. Now the other thing, of course, is once you really get through to high quality output and driver stages, you want to make sure that your interstage transformers and your output transformers are up to scruff, and they fit the plate resistance and so on, and the loading that goes with the tube. Because, for example, Frank here said to me, I have a Type 50 coming, and the Type 50, he said, you really want a special core like nanocrystalline or a nickel core or something, a permalloy output transformer, to hear the brilliance that is encapsulated in the tube. And as I said, my system, if you heard my video clips recently, yes, there have been tweaks with the different tube types that I've used, but do remember that I'm probably limited by my phono states, I'm limited by my speaker. So yes, there are small personality changes, but I bet you that I can't hear all the differences of the tube type at this moment. So yes, the tube type is important. If you have the rest of your system can actually support it, then it starts becoming more influential and more visible, because the rest is such a high level. If you're on a lower level, it's probably more about the synergy that you have in your system and the tonality, but those things only start to shine through if the rest of the components are at a real high level. So tube types important, yes. However, with a major asterisk, with a major remarks on all these other factors, which especially I would say typology and quality of your power supply setup that surrounds it, the quality of components that you're using. As that raises up, the tube type becomes more important. But if that's still at a basic level, I wouldn't be fussing too much about the tube types, and especially not tube rolling and so on. And these things, you have much more important things to actually focus on to improve your overall system. And so if you've seen what I've been doing, is I wanted to get to grips with the personality, and because I might coin this phrase as MuFi, MuFi, musical fidelity. I want something that just pleases me every day, and I wanted to get to grips with the subtleties of these tubes, also their interaction with the output transformer, and so that and find the combinations that work really well, and then start optimizing the rest of my system, such as the speaker and then later on the phono stage. So don't think I've gone mad with tube types. I haven't. I've learned some important lessons, and I hope you can take something away from this video as well, and put it in some context why it is important. But as seasoning, it is hugely important. But I do see it a little bit like a seasoning, and that seasoning becomes more and more important as the rest of the quality goes up in your system. Because the subtleties are at a very high level. Let's put it like that. Anyway, that was this video about tube types. I hope you enjoyed this content. If you want to support me or download some schematics from my earlier work, I've got those on Buy Me a Coffee. So any support is extremely appreciated to keep this channel going and to experiment more and bring reports like this. Thank you for tuning into my channel. Thank you for watching all the way through. I really appreciate it, and I'll hope to catch you in a next video. And if you have any questions, just put them in the comments and I'll get back to you. That's it for now. Have a brilliant day, and see you soon. Bye bye.